it is me. Let me see if I can share this. I want to talk about the problem with awareness, and particularly the problem of perfection. Why won't it let me share this? What am I missing? Somebody help me. What I'm missing? Swipe left. I'm swiping left. What am I missing? I just wish they'd let us do this from the desktop. Okay, so I can't share this. If you can share it, please share it. I want this message to get out. I can't figure out how to share it. What does that do? No idea what that did. Nope, wrong button. Come back. Oh well, I can't figure out how to share this. I would like to share this. Apparently I'm in video only mode. Anyway, here's the problem with awareness, right? So many of us who are in the self-help and self-development realm, and I have been a sucker to this, but also part of this myself. So this is a big awakening that's helped me and that I want to help you, is that we've interpreted self-awareness as self-perfection. So that every time we become more aware, then we're more and more angry that we're not perfect. So we use awareness as a way to be mad at ourselves and to show that we're not there yet. But that defeats the point of awareness, right? Like, this is where we can get into some deeper cultural context here. Like, awareness, self-awareness, greater self-awareness should lead us to liberation. But for many of us, greater self-awareness is leading us to more perfectionism. Not liberation, but in fact, more depression, more frustration, more feeling broken. And if you didn't watch my video from Monday about linear time versus cyclical time, this is where we're getting stuck again, right? So every time you get more aware, you have the potential to be more bemused, right? Like every time you see yourself clearly, you have the opportunity to go, there, I did it again. Look how funny that is. Or more compassionate, because you're human and we make mistakes, or we have desires, or we have failings. But many of us go about it the other way. So we're addicted to self-help, and we're addicted to self-help as a way of self-punishment. And to prove why we can't have the things we want, because we're still not perfect yet. And so we go into things like meditation, into spiritual traditions, into coaching, into business, and we are so angry that no matter what we learn and what we do, we're not getting there. And so then we keep punishing ourselves. But what that's doing is keeping us stuck in this cycle of gaining more awareness, but then using it against us. Gaining more awareness, using it against us. So this is the same idea that we talked about on Monday, where we open one door and then we're at a new challenge and we think we're back at square one. You're not. We're in a new realm. So this is where we can bring in some concepts, like when you hear about things like Buddhism or more Eastern spiritual traditions, and they talk about the concept of compassion. And we're like, yeah, I get it. I have to be a good person. No, you don't get it. That's not what we're talking about. Being a good person is judgment-based. That's like more self-awareness to be more perfect. Oh, I have to be a good person. Okay, against what scale? Like, compassion isn't getting at that. It's not telling you have to be a good person. Compassion is getting you to the point that the only possible option that feels good and moves you, expands you, is moving you forward as linear, but expands you, is that every time you have a moment of awakening and awareness, that we then meet it with compassion. Because if you meet it with judgment, we're back in the same cycle. If you meet it with disappointment, we're back in the same cycle. If you meet it with, oh my gosh, impatience, why aren't I there yet? Why am I still doing this? Why am I still making the same mistakes? Then we're back at square one. So increased self-awareness also has to go with increased compassion. That's the invitation of self-awareness, to be more compassionate to the self, not to others. We're not becoming more self-aware to become more compassionate to others. They have to go together in order for one to work, right? Otherwise, we're just hurting ourselves. So some of this is the gift, if you are in a Judeo-Christian background, some of this is the gift of what that tradition gave us, that there's a judgment, and that judgment is external. So I'm not knocking religion either way, because these are traditions, right? So, and it's the way we've internalized lessons more than what perhaps the lesson is. So we have this external judgment, which means that from a Western context, from a Judeo-Christian background, as we go towards self-improvement, the self-help genre, the billions of dollar industry every year, we still have that matched with the concept that approval or disapproval is outside of us. And we get to a certain point in time where we are then selected or not. So that leads us to have an interpretation of self-help as a perfectioning process, as a process to make ourselves better. And the industry is called self-improvement, right? Or self-help, but self-improvement, as if we are improving something on a linear scale. And at some point, we will be improved enough that we will be acceptable, loving, successful, beautiful, smart, whatever it is, right? But if we take it out of that historical context, if we take it out of the religious context that is embedded in tradition and culture, and look at it as just a concept in and of itself, then we can have the understanding that becoming more aware does not inherently imply judging, nor does it imply enhancing, changing, shifting, improving. It's just more aware. It's like, let me give a good example. It's like if you're at a restaurant and in front of you is your table, the people you are eating with, your plate, your drink, your silverware. Expanding your self-awareness is, oh, look at the whole table. Oh, look, there's a table next to me. Oh, look, there's a whole restaurant around me. That doesn't imply that you're improving because you're now aware of more. Nor does it imply that the meal's going to taste any different, the service is going to be any better, the restaurant's any better than what it was. All we're doing is expanding the zone through which we look at it. And so instead of seeing, oh, everything is about my meal, now all of a sudden you're witnessing, actually, there's a lot of customers here and they're juggling 20 meals. So what is what is. I was talking to Joanna Pavlak today, and she talked about that. What is what is, right? Our ability to be aware of what is does not mean does not give us the opportunity, or it doesn't have to give you the opportunity to be more frustrated with what is. So when you become aware of yourself, match it with compassion. This is where humor comes in. And if if you've ever seen a Buddhist monk talk or seen the Dalai Lama talk or Thich Nhat Hanh talk, they laugh a lot because that's the compassion empathy piece. Because more awareness just makes us more aware of all the ways we fail, all the ways we're not who we wish we were, all the ways we get caught up in our own stories, caught up in our own desires, caught up in our own foibles, our own insecurities. We either get mad about that or we laugh about that. And getting mad tends to not move us forward. Most people are not motivated by pain. They're not motivated by I'm imperfect. It pushes you, but it drives you into the ground. Versus compassion and empathy, which allows you to continue to expand. So that feeling of expanding, shrinking, and you feel like you're back at square one, you're back at square one, you're back at square one, check in with yourself. Are you using self-awareness as a way to punish yourself for not being perfect? Or are you using self-awareness as a stand-in for self-perfection? And if you are, it's an easy switch. It's literally like turning on a light switch. We sub-compassion. So anytime we use our awareness to go, oh my gosh, that's where I'm broken still. There's still so much more to fix. There's still so much more to do. Compassion. But I'm on the path. But I'm making it happen. But at least I can see it now. I taught a workshop this morning and we were doing some postural things and I fixed. I helped a woman find a more structurally aligned position in her spine. And then we realized, oh, okay, well that now opens us up to look at this other part of the body that isn't feeling aligned. And she said to me, I'm a mess. I'm a mess. I said, well, you're not a mess. You're just now aware of a different set of issues, right? And that's the thing with self-awareness. Every time you become more aware, you're like, oh, I'm more of a mess. I'm more of a mess. Every time I open one door, there's a whole nother Pandora's box. I'm a mess. That self-awareness is self-perfection. If we saw, oh my gosh, I fixed one thing and now I'm a mess, or look at all the ridiculous lack of clarity beyond that, whether that's physical instability or things that I don't know or more things to look at or look at all the now possibilities. If we met that with, wow, there's so much more here. Wow, that's going to take me a little bit to integrate. Wow, I guess I really didn't realize how much I really was working with. That's compassion, right? So one side of it is I'm at the bottom of the mountain. I have to push my way up and it's never ending. And the other side is, wow, that's a big mountain. I guess I'll get started and one step at a time is all I can do. You know? So this compassionate response is the only option if you want to get out of the cycle of, oh, I can't do it for my laptop, Cheryl. Thank you. I have not figured it out. Have you ever noticed that people who have what you want aren't more perfect than you, right? Because how frustrating is that? So this is a great show, and I'm so glad you brought that up, because how frustrating is it to look at people, say you want money, and you look at like the Kardashians, and you're like, well, they're not perfect people. Why do they have money? Why do I have to perfect myself to have money when they have money? But there are nasty people in the world who have success. Why can't I have success? I'm a good person. Or, I know for a fact that guy is really greedy, so how come he has a great marriage? You know, we can find examples of people who are imperfect in ways that drive us insane, but have everything you want. And that's the compassion piece. Because if you think that you have to get perfect in order to get what you want, then we're in this model of reward versus punishment. And then anytime we expand ourselves, what we do is we go right back to the core, because we see then now the next mountain ahead. So we're using our failings against ourselves as a way to hold ourselves back from the ultimate judgment in which we'll be gifted, you know, heaven or whatever it is. So again, a lot of this is in cultural context. So your cultural context might not be the same as mine in America growing up in a relatively Christian-based country. You know, even though we have separation of church and state, that's still the premise of the Puritan movement that founded the United States of America. So we have this concept of suffering. We have this concept of punishment. We have this concept of holding to extreme moral values, and that only through proving yourself through restriction and punishment do you get approval. And are you a good person? And by proving you're a good person, then the kingdom of heaven is open to you. Whether or not that fits with your religious context, I'm not knocking it. I'm just saying, look at the context through which you are approaching self-development. Because if that is your predominant overriding tradition, and more power to you if it is, are you then using every opening of awareness to punish yourself because you're not perfect yet? Because that's where we can meet with compassion. You know, if we truly want to feel better, then we've got to give up the feeling bad. And we can't give up feeling bad if we're always failing to meet our own expectations, particularly if those expectations are of perfection. And particularly if we don't let ourselves have things until we're a perfect person. So if you're holding off money, if you're holding off love, if you're holding off friendship, if you're holding off being able to express your message because you're not perfect, well, now we've got something to look at, right? Now we can see that maybe it's not the money or the relationship or the love or the whatever that's the problem. Maybe it's not the methodology that you're using, the practices that you're using, the tools that you're using to improve yourself. Maybe those aren't failing you. Maybe it's the belief that doing them will somehow get you somewhere that's the problem. Because it doesn't matter what you do in a big context. It doesn't matter. All of this is a way that we are taking ourselves through the steps of feeling more comfortable, feeling good, right? It's the idea that enlightenment, awareness, awakening comes bam like that. It doesn't mean we know how to live there, but it's all right there. We don't have to meditate for 20 years. We don't have to read self-development books. We don't have to get a PhD. We don't have to work for decades, right? We know we don't have to because not everybody does. If you had to, if that's the way human life worked, you had to become spiritually enlightened and proficient in something and blah, 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 then there would be no anomalies, right? Everybody would have to do it. But some people are born rich and you don't have money. And some people are naturally much happier and other people have struggle with depression, right? There's a spectrum here. But that doesn't mean that there's only one way to go about it. All of us have the potential to open our eyes, metaphorically, perhaps literally, open our eyes and see that what is what is. That's it. That's it. There's no game going on here. The game is going on here. And if you're using what's in here to tell yourself that you have to be perfect before you can see that it is what it is, then you're driving yourself nuts, right? You're just being mean. You're just being mean to yourself. And that's not going to get you any closer. It's just not. So this element of compassion, not to be a good person, not to extend it to other people, that is a natural inclination, of course, when you embody it. But the point is not to be compassionate because you have to, because that makes you more lovable. The point is compassion naturally arises when we drop perfection. It's the only alternative to judge or to laugh, right? They're not polar opposites, but the feeling is. So if we see our foibles as the laughable kind of foibles, like the Chevy Chase in the Christmas movie foibles, like, isn't that funny? Isn't that endearing that you're imperfect? Instead of, isn't that awful that you're not perfect yet? Do you see the difference in time? One says, right now you're endearing. The other one says, you're not there yet. So basically it's the same issue, imperfection, seen from two different places. One's in the moment, it is as it is, how amusing, it is what it is. And the other one is a future perfect self, looking back and saying, what's wrong with you? So this again gets into linear time versus cyclical time. And again, this cultural context that we live in and our sort of religious inheritance from a cultural sense. So really, really look for yourself and ask, are you using the things in your life to punish yourself? I was doing this myself. That's why it's really hit home to me when I had this eye-opening moment, and already been talking about it with some of my meditation clients in person, because we meditate, and one of my clients said this, my student said this, she goes, well, but I still judge. And I'm still judging, and I'm still judging, and I come here every week, and I've been working on it for years, but I'm still judging. Hey, Charlie. Like, I'm still judging this person. And we're like, okay, light bulb moment. Are you using meditation to become perfect? Because judgment is part of the human experience. Feeling separate is part of the human experience. Feeling threatened, feeling connected, feeling loving, feeling attached, those are all part of the human experience. So if all of a sudden we're like, I'm showing up for meditation and I'm still judging. Come on now, timeline on meditation, why aren't I perfect yet? Whoa, right? So instead, in those moments of meditation, again, she doesn't have to dump meditation. My student doesn't have to like switch modalities and sit at home and eat bonbons. Like, it doesn't matter what she's doing. What matters is that the attitude she was bringing towards herself was an attitude of failing. She was failing her own perfect self. Instead of bringing that empathetic compassion of, yeah, I am failing my own perfect self. How funny. How amazing that I can be in a world and be in an emotional context, thanks Charlie, where I can feel the perfection of wholeness and yet live an imperfect life. That's the human experience, right? The deeper spiritual sense of a side of us feels perfect, can feel the perfection of everything, and yet we just consistently suck at it. We totally suck at it. Like, we're either going to be mad about that or laugh about it. Otherwise, everything that goes on TV drives you crazy. Every political move drives you crazy. Everybody who's on the street who's poor drives you crazy. We drive ourselves crazy with the imperfection of the world because we know it could be different. We know we could be in universal love. We know we could be in universal connection. We know we could be in total acceptance towards ourselves and others. But if you use that knowledge to punish yourself for not being there, you're not getting any closer. You're getting further away. A lot further away. So that's where we bring compassion into it. Because compassion is what brings you closer to living it, not further away. So if you're trying and you're striving and you're not getting anywhere, maybe it's because you're actually repelling yourself through judgment, particularly judgment around perfection. So I'd love to hear from you guys if this is settling home for you. I love that idea of people who have what you want, who aren't more perfect than you, because the number of times, and Charlie can attest to this, the number of times I've been like, how come there are imperfect people who are rich and I'm not? Like, that's why this was such a light bulb moment for me. Like, I was using self-development to punish myself for not being perfect because only perfect people get money. Only perfect people get love. Only perfect people get fame, acceptance, community connection, marriage, babies, whatever it is for you, a job promotion, whatever, clarity. That's an intangible one that a lot of us, only like totally amazing people are allowed to be clear. The rich get richer no matter how stupid they are. Right. There's got to be something else going on here. There's got to be something else going on. It's not about being perfect. It's about acceptance. We are perfect in our imperfections. Right. These are all like totally cliche things we know, right? But there's truth to them. But if you can hear the line in your head, we're perfect in our imperfections, but not believe it about yourself, hello, like wake up. There's something in there for you. There's another phrase that I was thinking of earlier today when I was driving, but I couldn't jot it down. And it was so cliche, and I thought it's just like this perfect in our imperfections. Like, we're like, oh yeah, well, we say it to kids. Well, but your imperfections are what make you perfect. It's what makes you lovable. We love you for all your mistakes and that we just really care for you. But then as adults, we're like, but it doesn't count for you because you haven't gotten there yet. Because you haven't achieved ultimate success yet. Whatever that looks like for you. So like, come on, hypocrisy. And more than hypocrisy, it doesn't feel good. And we got a phone call. But that's the thing, like, why do we keep doing things that are blatantly moving us away from what we want? And most of us are intelligent people. Those of us, if you're on here, it's because you've got some interest, right? You've got interest in awareness. You've got interest in development. You've got interest in being the best version of yourself. But we can't feel better if we're punishing ourselves for not being the best. So this perfectionism piece, this using awareness as a way to be aware of all the ways you're not perfect, like that's a big one, particularly if you're really intelligent. This is the bane of smart people, They say dumb people are more confident. Yeah, because they're not picking apart all the reasons they're an idiot. But smart people sit there and self-analyze. And self-analysis leads to self-punishment. In this cultural context, that you have to be perfect to be rewarded. And so, particularly if you're intelligent, are you using it against yourself? Are you using your spiritual pursuit against yourself? And instead, bringing compassion. This is that meaning of deep, deep compassion. It's the humor of your own failings. And that, life is as it is. Yeah. Awesome. If you have any questions or thoughts, I'd love to hear them. Otherwise, I'm going to sign off for the day. I have like a billion other videos I want to share, but I'll have to save for another time. Yeah. Awesome. Consistent action seems to trump perfection, but it's easy to self-punish for not sticking with plans. For sure. But this is a really interesting thing about plans. So this is something I've been digging into for years because I'm a starter and a not finisher. Like, pathetically so. Like my hard drive is filled with projects that I've gotten to 75% and not finished. Not to mention if I took you on a video tour of my home that I've lived in for 3 months and yet to unpack, like all of that stuff. So action is really key here. Action isn't, for most of us, is not possible when the energy that we're using, that we could be using for action, is being used to punish. So if we're taking the mental energy that we need to transform mental energy into physical energy, the clarity of ability to move and flow, and we're taking that and we're turning it inwards on self, then we're not unencumbered. We're actually like keeping ourselves trapped in this little like argument, and the argument is weighing us down. So we've all had those moments where you just feel like, whoa, I'm totally clear. I can like throw out all the stuff in my closet and I can just go bam, 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 and bam through this. Doesn't mean we do it, but you've had that feeling, I'm sure, every now and then, that opening. And it's because in those moments, we're no longer assessing and judging ourselves and what it means and who you have to be and why do I have all this stuff and does it mean I didn't finish this? Does this mean I'm a failure? Like, we drop that, and that frees us to take the action. So for not sticking with plans, so another nuance to this is sometimes plans come from the place of assumed perfection, meaning I think I have to do it this way because that's what that kind of person would do. And so a lot of times, particularly when you're working from a soul's level, but maybe not conscious of it, is you never complete that because it's actually not a reflection of you. It's a reflection of what you thought you had to do. Where we gunk ourselves up is that many of us aren't able to, or perhaps the unveiling of the awareness takes a bit more time, that we're not always able to see in the moment that we chose things that aren't a deeper reflection of ourselves. And so we spend years punishing ourselves for things that we thought we should have wanted or finished, and we don't maybe never even see that it wasn't true to who we were. This is a big one. Like, I've actually spent the last, when did I quit the government? 2010, it's 2017. So I've spent the last 7 years, but before I did it, even before I left, so probably the last 9 years, feeling internally, egoically in particular, so in the mind, like a failure because I never made it to the National Security Council as an employee. And I quit because of that. Or not because of that, but I quit before that happened. And so part of my mind sees my, former colleagues and friends now running departments or being chief of staff or running agencies, and I'm like, see, this proves that you weren't smart enough and you never stick with anything because you only made it to this level and you could have made it higher, but you quit. And, you're not ready to really embrace being an expert at anything. That's the story I tell about it. And it's not true. Because at the same time, there's something bigger going on, right? At the same time, I'm doing this work. At the same time, I'm expanding in a totally different way. If I just stuck with that story, I should have wanted to keep my house and have a husband and have some kids and stay with that job and move up as far as I could because that proves that I was important. Because it did. It's a great feeling to have a job that proves you're important, right? Socially. But instead, I did, and I dropped all of that, sold the house, moved away, quit the job, and now I spent years floating around having no way to define myself or prove that I was important other than how I felt about myself. That's not an easy thing. So I can translate that to, I don't know how to stick through anything. I'm afraid of commitment. I don't know how to succeed. I don't really know what it takes to be successful at the highest levels. Or I could quit that story and meet it with compassion, like, oh, how funny. Oh, how interesting that even despite what my mind was telling me, my heart led me somewhere else. That even despite the story that I tell myself about failure, I seem to be doing quite well over here. So this idea of sticking with plans sometimes, and it's very hard to see for yourself. This is where I personally have coaches, or yoga teachers or mentors of some sort. It's very hard to see that sometimes our plans are actually coming from a non-aligned place, an unhealthy place, really, a non-soul-based place. And so we don't follow them through, and then we get mad about that, but we actually shouldn't have followed them through in the first place because they really weren't what we wanted, and thank goodness we quit. We're just using the quitting as a bad thing instead of a good thing. We're using it to punish ourselves for the poor skill set of following through instead of celebrating that your soul is actually speaking up. And consistent action matters. Right? So there are two different things that I wanted to pull out of that statement. Thank you for sharing that. Yeah, and I'm trying to think of other examples because I know so many people who've done this. Like, I've done this myself in online business. Like, well, I have to have a course like this because that's what everybody has, and I have to have it, at this period of time because that's when people launch. And then it's like, you sabotage it. And it turns out it's just because you had a deeper truth you weren't hearing. I wasn't hearing because I couldn't. Because my concept of what I should be was so much stronger than my felt sense of what I was, am, wanted to be. All of those verbs, present tense verbs. So, yeah, this is a big thing, but this is why reflection is really helpful. Reflection with other people in particular. Because sometimes we just don't see it. I actually wanted to do another video on this that I'll hint at, but this idea of, I'm 37, and all of a sudden the question of do I want children came up. Because it was always a given. Of course I want children. That's what women do, blah, 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 blah. And then all of a sudden I was like, oh, wait, so many cultural assumptions, so many social assumptions, so many emotional assumptions. I can't be happy unless my life looks like this. It never occurred to me that there was a me beyond the role. And most of us, there's no way to identify ourselves without a role, right? There's no way for me to be me without you. We talked about this on Monday a little bit. I can't identify me without you. I can't identify that I'm blonde without a brunette. I can't identify that I'm American without a Mexican. Like, there's no way to even conceive of yourself without another. But what that does is it gives us predetermined boxes, right? Well, I know I'm American because you said I am. I know I'm blonde because you said I am. So I don't have to think a lot about it, which is fine in that way, because those things aren't that big of a deal at this moment. Unless they really were. Unless it was like, well, I know I'm depressed because you told me I was. Because you're so much happier than me, and you said that the only way I could feel like this is if this was depression. Or this is like classic in, commercials on TV in the States about pharmaceutical drugs. Like, do you feel this, this, and this? And everyone's like, oh my God, I do. I had no idea I was deathly ill. Like, they tell you. They tell you. So it's where we get into trouble is taking those definitions without having the deeper journey that we're talking about here, the self-awareness piece of like, well, okay, I get that I'm defined as all of these things, but is there a me beyond those definitions? Is there a me that's a culmination of those definitions? Is there a me that has a thought about those definitions? And that's where the really interesting work comes up, where some people, jump out of life or like check out of life and go like shave their heads and move into monasteries. And so we have this like hilarious image in our head that a midlife crisis and self-awakening and living your purpose means leaving your life, quitting your job, divorcing your spouse, and like running away. But that's like the gut reaction of like, oh my God, no, you don't get to define me. But then there's the longer process of, okay, but what does define me? I was just talking about this with a client. Like, that's what my mastermind does. That we had these moments of like, bah, I get to say who I am. Stop treating me that way. I'm not like that. I decided to be different. Okay, that's like a toddler being like, no, I learned how to say no. But then the toddler moves on, right? There's a negotiation. There's like a learning process together. And that's what this is. Like, if we take that learning process and in our own eyes decide that every step in that learning process is failure to reach the felt perfect outcome where we get everything we want, then we're really in for a crappy ride. And if instead we choose to meet all of that awareness with compassion of like, oh my gosh, you're right, I've never thought about whether I want children. I've never thought about how I feel about this role of socioeconomic class or whatever it is that the roles frustrate you or awaken you. Like, if we meet that with curiosity, then we're going to be a bit smoother in that transition of, no, this is what I want, and then evolving into a relationship that's up-leveled, right? Like, if you've ever gone through that process with somebody you love, you set the boundary, you say I'm different, but then you've got to get up to here where you're now different and living that in a good way. And it's bumpy. But it's not bumpy because we're constantly judging, right? Like, that's a way to just fail and have the relationship break apart. Relationship up level because there's compassion and empathy that comes into it. So that's the same thing we afford ourselves. All right, any other thoughts? I love that we go all over with this. You guys are amazing at giving feedback and at bringing in examples so that we can really bring this home. Okay, I don't see any other comments. But basically, moral of the story, massive news flash for me, helping my students, helping me. Self-awareness is not an invitation to be self-critical, right? This is where we get into that real like gift of Eastern thinking and compassion. So self-awareness met with compassion, raise them up at the same time instead of self-awareness to point out all the ways you're broken. Awesome. I'd love to hear how this settles for you, and I'll talk to you soon. Mwah!